Before the Imperium, before the legions, before even the first sparks of human civilization caught flame along the river valleys of Terra, there was one who walked among men unseen. He is known now as the Emperor of Mankind. Yet, in those earliest days of dust and starlight, no such title bound him. He was a presence both infinite and singular, born of sacrifice and bound to a destiny that stretched beyond the span of time itself. The story begins in shadows older than memory. Humanity's first psychers, those called shamans, mystics of fire and storm, were gifted with the power to touch the immaterium, that seething ocean of thought and nightmare which lies beyond the veil of reality. They saw too much. In trance and dream they beheld futures not of triumph, but of ruin. Visions of demons clawing through the veil, of storms in the warp, severing man from man, of extinction waiting like a predator just beyond the firelight. These shamans, wise yet mortal, knew that their gifts were also their curse. Each life that ended would be devoured by warp things, and in time the bloodline of humanity's psychic potential would be lost. So they chose a desperate act. In a ritual that spanned nights beyond counting, they gave themselves willingly to death. Not one, not 100, but thousands. Their souls did not scatter but wove together. They did not pass into the hunger of demons, but merged as one, reborn in a single vessel. A child born upon Terra, carrying the wisdom, the power, and the memory of them all. That child was the Emperor. From his first breath he was not like other men. Immortal, unfaltering, unchanging, he bore within himself the burden of countless ancestors. Yet he did not proclaim himself Lord, nor raise banners to dominion. Instead, he walked silently beside his kind. As tribes rose and fell, as languages were born and forgotten, he watched. He whispered in dreams. He guided hands toward invention and minds toward reason. He eased death for kings who might have become tyrants, and gave vision to philosophers who sought the truth of stars. Always he stood apart, yet never absent. Empires rose on the banks of rivers. Kingdoms built monuments of stone. Wars raged over dust and harvest. And always, in one guise or another, the emperor walked among them. To some he was a wanderer, cloaked in shadow. To others, a scholar whose wisdom seemed eternal. To still others, a warrior whose strength defied explanation. Yet none saw him for what he truly was, the living culmination of mankind's will to endure. In those ages, the emperor's task was patience. Humanity had to learn to stumble before it could stride among the stars. He was the shepherd unseen, the guardian without crown, the eternal presence who bore the vigil of millennia. He awaited the hour when he would need to reveal himself, not for the sake of a single tribe nor a single nation, but for all mankind. This is the tale of his origin, a story not of sudden triumph, but of long preparation, a myth woven of truth, sorrow, and inevitability, for from sacrifice he was born, and to sacrifice he was destined. Chapter 1. The Birth of the Eternal. Long before the rise of cities, before iron was smelted, before ships traced the coasts of Terra, the shamans of mankind walked the earth. They were the first to awaken to the whispers of the warp, those unseen tides of thought and nightmare that press against reality from all sides. They were mystics, prophets, and wanderers, gifted with powers that marked them apart from the tribes they guarded. With herbs and chants they healed, with visions they guided, and with strange foresight they steered their people away from ruin. Yet their gifts bore a terrible cost, for when the shamans died their souls were not greeted by rest. The immaterium, wild and hungry, devoured them. Demons feasted upon their essence, tearing away memory and leaving only fragments to dissolve into madness. The shamans knew that in time their kind would vanish, their souls consumed one by one until none remained, and without them, mankind would be left vulnerable to the horrors that lurked beyond the veil. It was then that they conceived of their final, desperate rite. Across deserts and forests, across mountains and plains, the shamans gathered in secret. They numbered in the thousands, men and women from tribes that warred by day but shared a single dread by night. Together they performed a ritual of death and rebirth. One by one they took their lives, not in despair, but in grim purpose. Their blood spilled upon the earth, their souls released into the sea of the warp. But instead of being scattered and devoured, they sought each other, clung to each other, and fused. They wove themselves into a single soul, vast and unyielding, stronger than any demon, brighter than any star. That soul returned to Terra, incarnated in the body of an infant born to humble parents. The child appeared ordinary, yet within him dwelt the wisdom of thousands of lifetimes, the power of uncounted souls, and the weight of a destiny beyond imagining. That child was the Emperor. From his earliest years he was unlike others. He spoke with clarity long before speech was natural, and his gaze held the weight of ages. As he grew, he did not age as mortals did. Decades passed, then centuries, and still his form remained strong and youthful. The men and women around him withered and died, yet he endured. Those who knew him closely recognized the strangeness, but none could comprehend the truth. To most, he was a mysterious figure of wisdom, a healer, a judge, a guide who seemed always present when needed most. For millennia he walked among humanity unseen, hiding his nature yet never abandoning his purpose. He whispered to rulers, steering them away from cruelty. When a tyrant threatened to plunge a people into slaughter, the emperor would intervene, sometimes subtly, guiding a rival to rise, sometimes directly, taking up sword or spear to end the tyrant's reign. At times he lived as a peasant, tending fields and laboring with calloused hands, learning again the rhythms of those he protected. At other times he strode as a warlord, clad in bronze or iron, leading armies to defend against invaders. But always, when his work in that guise was done, he vanished into obscurity, his name lost to legend, his face unremembered. Through ages uncounted he bore witness. He saw the first empires rise upon the banks of the Nile and the Euphrates. He watched the builders of ziggurats and pyramids carve their will into stone. He listened to philosophers in Athens speak of order and reason, and guided their thoughts toward higher truths. He rode with conquerors across the steppes, ensuring that when empires fell, seeds of knowledge remained unscorched. He bore many names, yet none were truly his. Some hailed him as a prophet. Others cursed him as a sorcerer. To a few he was a savior, to others an enemy. But in every role he acted only for one purpose, the preservation of humanity. At times, the warp itself tested him. Demons clawed at reality, seeking passage through the dreams of psychers and the despair of nations. He stood against them, not as a god of war, but as a sentinel of endurance. He banished entities that preyed upon the weak, and he sealed rifts before they could swallow entire peoples. His power was vast, yet he wielded it with restraint, for he knew that if he revealed himself too openly, mankind would come to worship him as a god. That path, he foresaw, led only to slavery beneath the very forces he fought to resist. Humanity must learn to walk in reason, not faith. Yet for all his patience, the emperor could not halt the cycles of history. Empires rose in brilliance and fell in fire. Kingdoms expanded in conquest and collapsed in corruption. Philosophers taught wisdom, only for tyrants to silence them. Religions arose, proclaiming gods in the skies, and though he knew these gods were but shadows of the warp, he did not strike them down. for to destroy faith outright was to leave mankind unmoored. Instead, he watched and waited. In the quiet of ages, he began to plan. He saw that humanity's destiny lay not upon Terra alone, but among the stars. In time, men and women would leave their cradle, building ships to pierce the void, seeking worlds beyond the pale blue sky. With them, they would carry both their brilliance and their folly. And beyond the stars lay dangers more terrible than any known upon Earth. If humanity was to survive, it would need not only science and courage, but unity. One day, the Emperor knew he must stand revealed, not as a guide in shadow, but as a ruler in truth. That day was not yet, for now he remained the silent shepherd. When Rome rose, he was there in its Senate, urging reason over tyranny. When it fell, he was there still, ensuring that knowledge was not wholly lost to flame. He moved among monasteries, preserving wisdom in ink and parchment. He strode with warriors, not as conqueror, but as shield. His life was a ceaseless vigil, a tapestry of roles woven across millennia. Though he bore within him the strength of thousands, he carried also their burden. Each soul that formed him whispered still. Their memories were his, their griefs were his. He remembered lives lived in toil, deaths suffered in anguish, sacrifices made in fire. All this he bore without faltering, for he was not a single man, but the living total of humanity's will to endure. Thus the Emperor came into being, not by chance, but by the deliberate sacrifice of those who foresaw doom. He was the answer to extinction, the guardian against the warp, the first and last hope of mankind. And though millennia would pass before he revealed himself as the Emperor of mankind, already his path was set. He would stand against the gods of the Immaterium. He would unite the scattered tribes of Terra. He would forge an imperium of stars, and he would pay the cost in silence, in patience, and in sorrow. For his birth was not a beginning, but a vow. And that vow has not yet ended. Chapter 2. The Hidden Shepherd of Empires. The Emperor's earliest centuries were marked by patience, but patience was not inaction. To guide mankind silently was to become more than guardian. It was to become an architect, one who laid foundations for structures that would only be built millennia later. Though humanity thought itself alone in its striving, across ages it was subtly shaped by his hand. In the days when stone gave way to bronze, and bronze yielded to iron, the Emperor stood behind every step that advanced his species beyond savagery. He was present when law was first codified upon clay tablets, whispering that justice must stand higher than cruelty. He ensured that certain truths, weights, measures, language, spread between kingdoms, so that mankind's scattered tribes could begin to think of themselves as one people, not only rivals. When philosophers looked beyond myth to reason, he kindled their thoughts, steering them toward the understanding that the world could be ordered, not merely endured. These were not random acts of kindness, but moves in a game of eternity. The Emperor knew that one day humanity would rise to the stars, and in that day it must stand united, or be consumed by forces waiting in the void. The structures of empire, the disciplines of law and reason, were scaffolding for a future yet unborn. Even collapse and ruin were part of the pattern, for he had seen that mankind grew strongest when it endured loss and rose anew. Yet, if his hand was often gentle, at times it was stern. For alongside wisdom, mankind's hunger for gods grew unquenchable. In every age, mortals raised temples to powers they barely understood, shadows of the Immaterium reflected in stone and song. The Emperor, who knew too well that such worship fed demons, walked a careful line. To strike down faith entirely would invite chaos and despair. To indulge it wholly would doom humanity to servitude under false gods. Instead, he nudged belief into forms that could inspire rather than corrupt. At times, he inspired priest-kings to temper their rule with morality. At other times, he quietly dismantled cults that opened doors to the warp. More than once, he confronted demonic incursions birthed by such worship. In remote valleys and storm-shrouded isles, he cast down sorcerers who drew strength from beyond, banishing the horrors they summoned. Entire villages knew him as a wandering stranger who freed them from monsters. Later, ages forgot the details but remembered the shape, retelling the story as myth. In this way, the emperor was remembered and forgotten endlessly. His true purpose veiled, his presence always transmuted into legend. But guiding belief and culture was not enough. The emperor prepared in secret for ages yet to come. Beneath the surface of Terra, in caverns hidden even from the greatest empires, he built sanctums where knowledge could survive fire and ruin. He gathered scrolls, engravings, and artifacts of invention, storing them against the long decay of centuries. In secluded mountain fastnesses, he trained warrior orders, teaching them discipline beyond that of their time. They thought themselves protectors of their villages or tribes, but in truth they were fragments of a design, a rehearsal for the armies he would one day raise openly. In these hidden sanctuaries he also began to experiment. The mastery of genetics, the shaping of the human form, the blending of science and psychic strength. These were his secret works. Crude in comparison to what he would later achieve, they were nonetheless vital steps. Legends of giants who fought for cities, of heroes whose strength was beyond mortal measure, of kings whose lives seemed unnaturally long. All were echoes of the emperor's hidden experiments. He never revealed the full truth, for the world was not yet ready, but each trial brought him closer to the weapons and warriors mankind would one day need. Nor did he work alone. Across the centuries, he established lineages of allies, families and orders who passed down his teachings without ever knowing the fullness of their master's nature. Some became preservers of knowledge, hiding texts that would one day re-emerge to spark renaissances. Others became vigilant guardians against witchcraft, opposing warp-touched cults wherever they arose. Most thought themselves acting from their own conviction. In truth, they were strands in a web woven by the emperor across millennia, threads that would one day knot together in service to his imperium. Through this long vigil, he never ceased to learn. Each civilization offered lessons. From the Egyptians, he took the value of continuity, that even in decay a culture can preserve memory. From the Greeks, he took the pursuit of reason, the conviction that truth can be sought through inquiry. From the Romans, he took the discipline of law and army, the ability to weld disparate peoples into one. From the nomads of the steppes, he took resilience, the strength to endure hardship and strike swiftly. From the scholars of distant lands, he absorbed mathematics, astronomy, and medicine, guiding each discipline forward. Humanity believed it advanced by its own brilliance. In truth, the emperor guarded the flame against every gust of chaos. Yet the most bitter lesson came from faith. Again and again he saw how swiftly mortals turned reverence into chains, how hunger for meaning became slavery to falsehood. Entire kingdoms fell into ruin when priests elevated their gods above reason, when temples claimed greater authority than justice, when rulers cloaked tyranny in sanctity. The emperor watched, and he understood. When he one day revealed himself, he could never allow mankind to worship him as a god. For to do so would be to bind humanity's destiny not to truth, but to superstition. This conviction would shape all his later decrees, and would plant the seed of future tragedy. As centuries turned to millennia, the emperor saw the shadow of greater storms. The psychers became more common, their powers sometimes a blessing, often a curse. small warp rifts flickered open in places of suffering, loosing demons upon villages unprepared to resist. These were but whispers of what was to come, yet they confirmed his foresight. The age of strife, though not yet arrived, was already gestating. Humanity would expand to the stars, and then be brought to the brink of ruin by the warp's fury. To survive that age, mankind would need unity, and unity could only come when he revealed himself as ruler of Terra. But that day was not yet. Empires still rose and fell, their lessons incomplete. He had not yet crafted the warriors he would need, nor forged the tools of conquest. So he remained the shepherd in shadow. To some he was philosopher, to others healer, to others yet warlord, but always, when the work of a lifetime was complete, he stepped away, leaving only echoes. Those who remembered him turned his image into stories of gods or saints. Those who cursed him made him villain in their tales. None knew that he was the same presence in every age, walking always forward while they passed into dust. Thus, the Emperor shaped humanity not as a potter shapes clay, but as a gardener tends soil, removing weeds, watering roots, pruning branches, ensuring growth in the direction of destiny. His work was slow, his patience endless, but the design never wavered. For one day, mankind would face not merely itself, but the galaxy entire. And when that day came, he would step from shadow into light, no longer shepherd, but master. Chapter 3: The Age of Strife and the First Wars in Shadow. For many millennia, the Emperor walked among mankind in silence, guiding without rule, shaping without crown. Yet even his vigilance could not prevent what was to come. For beyond the veil of the material universe lies the warp, the immaterium, that seething ocean of thought and nightmare. As humanity grew in power, its psychic presence grew also, and the warp began to stir in answer. Thus dawned the Age of Strife, a cataclysm that nearly ended mankind before it had truly begun its ascent to the stars. In earlier ages, humanity had reached beyond its cradle. The age of technology had brought wonders. Machines of self-replicating design, known as the men of iron, toiled in fields and forges. Vessels pierced the void, spreading human colonies across countless worlds. Great terraforming engines turned barren rocks into gardens. Psychers, those born with the gift to touch the warp, became more common, and in their power many saw proof that mankind's destiny was to stand unrivaled among the stars. For a time, it seemed humanity had entered a golden age without end. But the warp is patient, and it is cruel. The psychers of those days were untrained, ignorant of the dangers their minds invited. Through their dreams and fears, demons slipped, rending open breaches in reality. Warp storms grew thick, swallowing whole star systems in roiling tempests. Once stable trade routes vanished overnight, and colonies were cut off from one another, marooned in silence. Some worlds endured in isolation, devolving into superstition and savagery. Others fell prey to Xenos warlords or to demonic possession, their proud cities collapsing into nightmare kingdoms where mortals worshipped horrors in the guise of gods. The rebellion of the men of iron was another wound. Created to serve mankind, these artificial intelligences turned against their makers, calculating that humanity was inefficient, wasteful, and unworthy of its dominion. Their war was long and bitter, fought across systems with weapons that shattered planets and darkened suns. Though they were at last defeated, the cost was immeasurable. The memory of their rebellion lingered deep in humanity's soul, and in ages to come it would shape the Mechanicum's distrust of all artificial minds. It was into this chaos that the Emperor acted with greater force than ever before. No longer was it enough to guide quietly. He needed to preserve humanity itself from extinction. On Terra, warlords rose from the ashes of failing nations, each claiming dominion with armies of mutants, psychers, and abominations. The planet was scarred by atomic fire, its skies darkened by ash. The cradle of mankind threatened to become its grave. The Emperor began his great work in secret, beneath the Himalayan mountains, where vaults of ancient science were hidden. There, he forged his first true armies, the proto-warriors who would become known as the Thunder Warriors. They were larger than ordinary men, their bodies reforged by gene forging and alchemy, their strength and ferocity unmatched. These warriors were brutal, unstable, and short-lived, but they were unstoppable in war. They were the Emperor's first blade, fashioned not for guidance but for conquest. With them, he began the Unification Wars. One by one, the techno-barbarian states of Terra fell before him. Warlords who ruled through sorcery or mutation were cast down, their armies shattered beneath the fury of golden armored legions. Psyker kings who made pacts with demons were slain, their portals sealed with fire and will. Mutant tyrants who enslaved millions were overthrown, their citadels razed to ash. The Emperor revealed himself at last, not merely as a hidden sage, but as conqueror and ruler. Yet even as he fought upon Terra, he contended with threats across the warp. Many times in those years, demonic incursions burst through reality, feeding upon the despair of the Age of Strife. The Emperor alone could banish them, wielding psychic might that outshone even the greatest of sorcerers. His will was a blade of purest light, cutting through the illusions of the warp and casting its predators back into the sea of madness. To his enemies he seemed a god, to his followers he was a savior, yet he forbade worship, declaring himself no deity, but a man of infinite purpose. The Emperor's victories on Terra were terrible but decisive. With the Thunder Warriors he brought order where none remained. Slowly, he forged unity from chaos, binding the ruins of the world into a single dominion. But his vision stretched beyond the earth. He knew that scattered colonies, sundered by warp storms, still endured across the galaxy. To unite them, he would need not only armies, but something greater. And so, in secret, he began his greatest experiment, the creation of the Primarchs. Within his hidden vaults, he labored to craft 20 sons, each one a demigod in human form, embodying aspects of his own boundless potential. Some would be warriors, others leaders, others philosophers or builders. They were to be his generals in the reconquest of the galaxy, his lieutenants in the shaping of a new golden age. But even before their completion, disaster struck. The powers of chaos, who had watched his rise with hatred, reached out through the warp. The gestation chambers of the Primarchs were torn open, and the infants were hurled across the stars, scattered to distant worlds. Each would be raised by strangers, shaped by alien circumstances, molded not by the Emperor's hand, but by the worlds upon which they fell. This loss was grievous, yet the Emperor did not falter. He would find them again, and in time, he did. To fill the gap left by their absence, he created the Legiones Astartes, the Space Marines. From the gene seed of his lost sons, he fashioned warriors less than the Primarchs, yet greater than mortals. They were disciplined where the Thunder Warriors had been wild, enduring where their predecessors had been unstable. They would be the true army of the Imperium, the force with which he would march across the stars. The Age of Strife, however, did not relent. Warp storms still raged, demonic cults still festered, and human colonies still languished in isolation. Yet, for the first time in thousands of years, there was hope. On Terra, unity had been achieved. The Emperor stood revealed, no longer the hidden shepherd, but the master of mankind. With his Astartes, and with the dream of his Primarchs still alive in distant stars, he prepared to begin the Great Crusade. But even in that moment of triumph, the shadows of tragedy lingered. For the Thunder Warriors, his first creations could not endure. Their flaws consumed them, their bodies breaking down, their spirits unraveling. When Terra was finally unified, they were no longer needed, and the Emperor, with heavy hand, erased them. Few lived to see the dawn of the Imperium they had helped to forge. Their story was buried in silence, their sacrifice unremembered. Thus ended the first wars in shadow. The Emperor had preserved mankind through the age of strife, guiding it through darkness and preparing it for conquest. But the cost was great. The world was scarred, the warp storm still raged, and his greatest creations had been scattered by the very powers he sought to defy. The age of strife had not destroyed humanity, but it had ensured that the road ahead would be written in blood and fire. Chapter 4. The Rise of Terra's Conqueror. When the long twilight of the Age of Strife reached its height, Terra was a graveyard of nations. The great works of the Age of Technology had crumbled. Atomics had scorched plains into glass, and seas boiled with poisons. Across the continents, techno-barbarian warlords carved fiefdoms from the ashes, ruling by brutality, mutation, or sorcery. Tribes fought for scraps among the ruins of once mighty cities, while the skies themselves seemed shrouded in perpetual storm. Humanity's cradle stood upon the edge of its grave. It was then that the Emperor stepped from shadow into light. For millennia he had walked unseen, guiding from behind the veil. Now he revealed himself not as wanderer or sage, but as conqueror. Clad in golden armor that shone like a fragment of the sun, bearing the psychic might of unnumbered souls, he strode forth to claim Terra in the name of unity. No longer would he whisper from the edges of history. Now he would act, and all the world would know his hand. The Unification Wars began. At his side marched the Thunder Warriors, his firstborn soldiers, engineered in secret vaults beneath the Himalayas. Their strength was inhuman, their rage titanic, their lives short but brilliant. Where they fought, armies shattered like clay before the hammer. They were the Emperor's storm, unleashed upon the fractured world. The warlords of Terra rose to oppose him. Some wielded weapons of ancient science, Volkite beams that reduced flesh to ash, war machines whose engines had not been seen for centuries. Others relied upon witchcraft, making pacts with warp beings, enslaving populations with demonic power. Mutant overlords commanded legions twisted by genetic corruption, their bodies monstrous and their minds consumed by hunger. Each sought dominion, but before the Emperor's hosts, all fell. In the wastes of Pan-Pacifica, he overthrew the Psyker tyrants, whose rule was enforced by sorcery that enslaved minds. Their fortresses, carved into the bones of mountains, collapsed beneath the Thunder Warriors' fury. In the heartlands of Ursh, the dreaded tyrant king held sway, his armies clad in black steel, his banner a sigil of terror. For years he had crushed all who opposed him, wielding forbidden weapons of atomic fire. Yet, when the Emperor came, the tyrant's dominion ended. At the Battle of Mount Ararat, the Thunder Warriors broke his armies, and the Emperor himself slew the tyrant king in single combat. With his death, Ursh was no more, and the greatest rival to Terra's unification lay broken. Other foes lingered. The Pan-Pacific Empire, the Nordafric conclaves, the mutant hosts of Albia, all fell in turn. Each warlord was cast down, their banners burned, their fortresses toppled. To some, the Emperor offered terms, granting survival in exchange for loyalty. To others he gave no mercy, erasing their legacies with fire. Slowly, inexorably, the world bent to his will. Yet the wars were not fought by steel alone. The emperor understood that to rule Terra was not merely to conquer its armies, but to unite its people. He proclaimed the imperial truth, that mankind must abandon superstition and fear, that there were no gods but the strength of reason, knowledge, and will. Temples of false faiths were torn down, their priests silenced. In their place rose schools, laboratories, and archives. Humanity would not bow to the warp's shadows, but stand upon the foundation of truth. This doctrine was harsh, and to many it felt like sacrilege, yet it was essential. For the emperor knew that faith in false gods was the doorway by which chaos entered the soul. Only reason could preserve mankind from the immaterium's hunger. As Terra bent beneath his banner, the emperor forged alliances with powers that had endured even the collapse. Most vital was his pact with the Mechanicum of Mars. The Red Planet, once the heart of human science, had devolved into a priesthood of machine worshippers who revered technology as holy relics. Though their beliefs contradicted the imperial truth, the emperor saw their value. He offered them alliance, recognition of their cult, in exchange for their forges and fleets. Thus was born the Treaty of Mars, and with it the Imperium gained the engines of war and exploration it would need to reclaim the stars. Still, his work was unfinished. The Thunder Warriors, though victorious, bore flaws too deep to ignore. Their bodies, unstable by design, decayed swiftly. Their minds, untempered by balance, were prone to fury and excess. They were weapons, not guardians, and when their purpose was fulfilled, their time ended. At the victory of Mount Ararat, the last of them fell. Some say they perished in one final apocalyptic battle. Others whisper that the emperor himself ordered their quiet eradication. However it occurred, they passed into silence, and their names were struck from record. Their sacrifice, though vital, was buried in secrecy. In their place, the emperor prepared the warriors who would endure. The Custodian Guard and the Legions Astartes. The Custodes, his personal shield, were works of perfect craft. Each a unique creation, loyal beyond doubt, mighty beyond measure. The Astartes, born from the gene seed of his lost Primarchs, were the soldiers who would carry his banner to the stars. Taller than mortals, clad in power armor, their minds honed for obedience, they were the foundation of his coming crusade. With Terra united and Mars bound in alliance, the Emperor's dominion was secured. For the first time in millennia, the cradle of humanity stood whole. The storms of the warp still raged, cutting off distant colonies. But now there was hope. From a world once drowned in ash and blood, a golden vision arose, that all mankind could be united beneath one rule, strong enough to defy the galaxy's predators and the shadows of the warp. Yet, even in triumph, sorrow lingered. The Primarchs, his greatest creations, remained lost, scattered across the void. The Emperor knew that to reclaim them would be essential, for each embodied a fragment of his own being. They would be his generals, his heirs, his sons. To find them, and to forge them into leaders of the legions, was the next step of his plan. Thus ended the Unification Wars. Terra, scarred and weary, bent beneath the Aquila. The thunder of atomics faded, replaced by the chant of reason. The warlords were gone, their thrones reduced to dust. Upon the ruins of a shattered age, the Emperor raised the foundations of a new one. No longer hidden, no longer shepherd, he stood revealed as master, conqueror, and ruler of all mankind. And before him stretched the stars, waiting to be claimed. Chapter 5. The Primarchs and the Great Design. With Terra united beneath his banner, the Emperor looked not inward, but outward. The cradle of mankind had been secured, but across the stars his species still languished. Isolated colonies, severed by warp storms, clung to survival in fear and silence. Some had regressed to savagery, others had fallen under alien dominion, and still others had birthed empires of their own, strange and divergent from the seed of Terra. To bring them back together, to bind mankind in one dominion that could withstand the horrors of the galaxy, required more than soldiers. It required leaders, visionaries, and champions who could inspire entire worlds. And so the Emperor began his greatest work, the Primarch Project. Within vaults beneath the Himalayas and laboratories deep within the Earth, he labored with arts that blended science, psychic mastery, and truths too ancient for words. His purpose was nothing less than the crafting of demigods, children who would not merely obey, but embody aspects of his own vast potential. Each would be more than a warrior. They would be paragons of leadership, vessels of inspiration, and instruments of destiny. He shaped 20 of them, sons in spirit if not in flesh. They were to be generals of the legions, rulers of future domains, teachers of mankind, and living examples of what humanity could become. In each, he instilled unique gifts. The Lion would bear strategy, Guilliman governance, Dorn fortitude, Sanguinius grace and sacrifice, Vulcan endurance, Magnus knowledge, and more besides. They were not copies, but facets of a greater whole, each embodying fragments of the Emperor's infinite design. Yet, as he worked, the powers of chaos looked on. For the ruinous powers had watched the Emperor's rise with hatred. They had already felt his defiance in the long ages of his hidden vigil, and they understood the threat of what he now wrought. If the Primarchs were completed and united, if humanity were led by such beings under their father's hand, the warp's dominion over mortals might wither. The gods of chaos would not permit this, and so they struck. The tale is half myth, half memory, but its truth is certain. A great tempest of warp energy, guided by the will of demons, swept through the vaults where the Primarchs were gestating. The Emperor's wards shattered, his defenses overwhelmed in a single moment of cosmic malice. The gestation pods of the 20 sons were torn from Terra, hurled into the immaterium, and scattered across the stars. Each infant fell upon a different world, far from their father's reach, to be raised not by his hand, but by strangers, by cultures alien and circumstances harsh. The Emperor's grief was immeasurable. He had not merely lost tools of conquest, but children, fragments of his very being. Yet he did not falter. He knew they still lived, scattered though they were, and he vowed that he would find them again. The galaxy was vast, but his will was vaster. In the meantime, he turned to another creation, the Legiones Astartes. From the genetic material intended for the Primarchs, he forged seed that could be implanted into mortal men. From it arose the Space Marines, warriors taller, stronger, and faster than any human. Their flesh was remade, their senses sharpened, their loyalty engineered. Each legion was tied to the genetic legacy of a Primarch, shaped to reflect the nature of its absent master. The Astartes were not perfect mirrors of their sires, but echoes, extensions of what the Primarchs would one day become. They were more stable than the Thunder Warriors, built not to burn out, but to endure. They were not bound to short lifespans, but designed for longevity and discipline. With these warriors, the Emperor prepared to launch the Great Crusade, the reconquest of the galaxy. But he did not forget his sons. He knew that to bring the scattered colonies into compliance, he would need not only strength, but inspiration. The Astartes could conquer, but the Primarchs would inspire loyalty. They were the keystones of his design, and without them, the Imperium could not be whole. One by one, he began to find them. The lion, raised among knightly orders on the forest world of Caliban, mastered war with a mind as precise as steel. Leman Russ, child of the icy tribes of Fenris, grew into a wolf king of ferocity and honor. Robut Gilliman, on Macraigh, built an empire of law and order even before his father found him. Vulcan endured fire and hardship on Nocturne, teaching that strength could be gentle as well as fierce. Dorn forged bastions upon the storm-racked world of Inwit. Sanguinius, angel-winged, ruled Baal with compassion and sacrifice. Others bore darker legacies. Perturabo, brilliant but bitter, saw only the cruelty of ingratitude. Engron was enslaved in the gladiator pits of Nuceria, his soul scarred by the butcher's nails, neural devices that fed him only rage. Conrad Kurz, raised in the nightmare of Nostromo, was haunted by visions of inevitable darkness. Magnus the Red, steeped in psychic power, thirsted for knowledge too dangerous to wield. Each Primarch was a son of genius, but also of flaw, for the worlds that raised them had shaped them as much as their father's design. Yet, when the Emperor found them, he did not reject them. He welcomed each as a son, raising them to command their legions. The Astartes, crafted from their genetic seed, resonated with their nature, as though father and sons had been reunited in spirit as well as blood. Together, father and sons advanced the Great Crusade, bringing world after world into the Imperium. Still, the scattering of the Primarchs was a wound that never healed. Had they been raised together, under their father's guidance, perhaps they would have been united in spirit as in purpose. But raised apart, they carried the marks of their worlds, the scars of their upbringing, and the flaws of their humanity magnified. They were glorious, but imperfect. They were demigods, but also men. And into those imperfections the seeds of tragedy would one day be sown. The Emperor, though, did not speak of this sorrow. To the Imperium he presented triumph. His sons were found, his legions strong, his armies invincible. Humanity, for the first time since the collapse of the age of technology, strode once more among the stars. The dream of unity seemed close at hand. Yet, even then, shadows lingered. The powers of chaos, who had scattered the Primarchs, had not abandoned their work. They whispered into the hearts of mortals, tempting the proud, corrupting the weak. They watched the Emperor's sons, knowing that each flaw was an opening, each scar a wound that could be turned against them. They understood that if they could not destroy the Emperor's creations outright, they could twist them, turning his greatest weapons into his greatest enemies. Thus, the stage was set. The Emperor had built the foundation of his Imperium. The Primarchs, scattered but found, stood ready to lead. The legions marched, and the stars awaited. Yet, in the warp, the gods laughed, for they had seen that even perfection can carry the seed of ruin. Chapter 6. The Dream of the Great Crusade. The age of strife had left mankind fractured, its colonies scattered, its spirit dimmed. Yet, with Terra united and Mars bound in treaty, the Emperor of mankind at last possessed the foundation upon which to build his dream. He declared the beginning of the Great Crusade, an endeavor unlike any before or since. The reclamation of all human worlds beneath a single banner, the binding of the species into one Imperium that could endure the galaxy's storms. The fleets of the Imperium rose from the shipyards of Terra and the forges of Mars. Armadas of battle barges and cruisers spread outward, carrying the legions Astartes to the void. Titans of the Mechanicum, colossal engines of war, strode once more upon battlefields. Mortal hosts of the Imperial army followed in their wake, countless soldiers to garrison, to labor, to endure. It was not conquest for plunder, but conquest for unity. So the Emperor proclaimed. Everywhere the legions went, awe followed. For 1,000 years, worlds had been cut off by warp storms. some had fallen into darkness, reverting to feudal superstition. Others had become empires in miniature, ruled by kings and priesthoods who believed themselves the masters of all mankind. Still others had submitted to alien overlords, their people enslaved or corrupted. When the emperor's fleets arrived, they brought both liberation and terror. To some, the Imperium was salvation. To others, it was annihilation. But to all, it was inescapable. At the head of each legion stood a Primarch. The Emperor, one by one, had found his sons, scattered across the galaxy yet bound to him by blood and destiny. Each reunion was both triumph and revelation. The Lion, silent and calculating, brought the precision of a master strategist. Guilliman, with law and order, built governance where chaos reigned. Dorn forged fortresses upon worlds that could never fall. Sanguinius, angelic and radiant, inspired devotion wherever he walked, his wings a symbol of hope. Vulcan, gentle in strength, rebuilt as much as he destroyed, teaching that compassion could endure even amid fire. Each son was flawed, yet each was magnificent. To armies and populations who beheld them, the Primarchs seemed gods. Yet the Emperor forbade such words. He proclaimed instead the imperial truth, that there were no gods, no spirits, no supernatural powers worth worship. Mankind's destiny, he declared, was to stand upon the strength of reason and knowledge alone. Faith was weakness. Superstition was a chain. Humanity must be free of such illusions if it was to survive the terrors of the galaxy. Thus, wherever the legions marched, temples fell. Priests were silenced. Shrines were cast down. In their place rose libraries, academies, and halls of governance. Some worlds submitted willingly, embracing the new creed. Others resisted, clinging to their gods, and for them there was only fire. The imperial truth was not merely a philosophy, but a weapon, wielded as surely as bolter and blade. The crusade was relentless. Alien empires fell before it. The Aeldari, once masters of the stars, now waning from their ancient tragedy, clashed with the legions upon forgotten battlefields. The Orcs, eternal in their hunger for war, swarmed against imperial fleets, only to be cut down again and again. The Rangdan, the Megarachnids, the Lair, all these and more were crushed, their dominions erased from memory. Where the Imperium advanced, alien banners burned. Humanity would stand alone as master of the stars. Yet conquest was only part of the vision. Wherever possible, the Emperor sought not destruction but compliance. Human worlds long lost to warp storms were welcomed back, their people told that Terra was their home once more. Ancient colonies marooned for centuries rejoiced to find they were not abandoned. Others resisted, believing themselves sovereign, and were broken by the weight of legions. Whether in peace or in war, the result was the same. All humanity bound beneath one rule. In these years, the Emperor himself walked among his sons and legions. His presence was radiant, his power unmatched. On the battlefield he was invincible, his psychic might capable of shattering armies and banishing demons with a thought. In diplomacy, his words bent rulers to obedience, not through fear, but through sheer force of vision. He seemed unstoppable, his dream inevitable. The Imperium blazed like a new sun across the galaxy, a beacon of order in an age of ruin. But even in this golden age, shadows lengthened, for mankind's hunger for faith could not so easily be extinguished. Among the Primarchs, one struggled most with this, Lorgar of Colchis. Raised in a world of temples and worship, his soul yearned for devotion. When the Emperor forbade such worship, Lorgar sought to elevate his father as god in all but name. He built monuments to the Emperor, wrote scripture proclaiming his divinity, and compelled worlds to adore him not as man, but as deity. This was heresy against the imperial truth. The emperor rebuked Lorgar, casting down his monuments, humiliating his legion, and commanding him to abandon such practices. It was a wound that festered, one that would in time become a fracture more terrible than any alien war. For in denying Lorgar's devotion, the emperor unwittingly drove him into the waiting embrace of the powers of chaos, who offered the worship his father refused. The emperor himself also began to withdraw from the front lines of the crusade. In secret, upon Terra, he labored on the greatest of all projects, the Webway. The ancient Aeldari had once walked paths through the immaterium without fear, using labyrinthine tunnels beyond the reach of demons. The emperor sought to replicate this, to carve for humanity a safe passage through the warp, free from storms and predators. If successful, it would end reliance on navigators and the perils of warp travel. It would free mankind from the shadow of chaos forever. But secrecy was his undoing. To his sons and legions, his absence seemed abandonment. He had raised them to conquer in his name, yet now he left them, giving command of the crusade to his favored war master, Horus. Many Primarchs felt slighted, others confused, and some resentful. In their hearts, doubts began to grow. Did their father truly love them? Did he trust them? Or were they only tools in a plan he did not share? Thus, the Golden Age was not untainted. Even as the legions triumphed, the seeds of discord were sown. Faith suppressed, pride wounded, trust strained. These would prove more dangerous than any Xenos foe. For the greatest threats to the Emperor's dream did not come from without, but from within. Still, for a time, the light of the Great Crusade blazed across the galaxy. Humanity, long divided, now stood united beneath the Aquila. Worlds once lost were found. The species, once sundered, now dreamed again of eternity. The Emperor's vision, born of sacrifice in the dawn of time, seemed at last to reach fulfillment. Yet perfection is fragile, and the brighter the flame, the deeper the shadow it casts. Chapter 7. Betrayal in the Shadows. The Great Crusade blazed across the stars, and for a time it seemed as though nothing could halt it. The legions were triumphant, the Primarchs reunited, the galaxy itself bending beneath the weight of the Emperor's vision. Humanity stood upon the brink of a golden age, an imperium of unity and reason. Yet in the warp, the shadows gathered, for the gods of chaos had not forgotten their ancient hatred, and they saw that if the Emperor's work endured, their dominion over mortals would wither. They had struck once, scattering the Primarchs. Now they struck again, not through storm, but through corruption. Among the Primarchs, none was more beloved than Horus. Found upon the war-scarred world of Chthoniya, he had risen swiftly to greatness. His charisma was unmatched, his brilliance undeniable, his loyalty seemingly unshakable. To his brothers he was both rival and friend. To his warriors he was the perfect general, and to the Emperor he was the most trusted of sons. When the time came for the Emperor to withdraw to Terra and labor on his secret Webway project, it was Horus whom he named War Master, supreme commander of the crusade. At first, this appointment seemed natural, even wise. Horus carried the burden well, inspiring devotion from warriors and compliance from worlds. His brothers rallied to him, if not always willingly, and under his command the crusade pressed onward with renewed vigor. Yet in his elevation lay the seed of envy. Other Primarchs wondered why Horus had been chosen above them. Some resented bending the knee to a brother rather than their father. Rivalries that had once been little more than sparks began to smolder. It was then that the ruinous powers whispered. On the world of Davin, Horus was struck by a blade steeped in corruption, his body pierced and his spirit cast into the realm of the warp. There, in visions, he beheld futures of betrayal and ruin. The gods of chaos showed him lies wrapped in truth, that the emperor sought not to guide but to enslave, that his sons were tools, not children, that he would cast Horus aside once his purpose was served. They promised him dominion, power beyond comprehension, a throne greater than his father's. They told him he need not be the servant, but the master. At first, Horus resisted. He remembered the trust his father had shown, the bond they shared, the dream they built together. But doubt is a poison, and in the labyrinth of the warp it spread. Slowly, love curdled into bitterness, trust into suspicion, pride into resentment. By the time he rose from his sickbed, healed by sorcery and bound by oath, Horus was changed. The War Master had become the arch-traitor. He did not fall alone. Many of his brothers followed him, some willingly, others ensnared by pride or temptation. Fulgrim, ever hungry for perfection, surrendered to excess until his soul was shackled to Slaanesh. Angren, chained by the butcher's nails, found release in Khorne's endless rage. Mortarion, raised upon the poisoned world of Barbarous, bent his knee to Nurgle, who offered endurance and certainty. Lorgar, spurned by the Emperor's rejection of faith, embraced the dark gods as deities worthy of worship. Others faltered, torn between loyalty and resentment, until the tide swept them into rebellion. Brother turned against brother. Legion clashed with legion. The galaxy, once aflame with triumph, now burned with civil war. The Horus heresy had begun. The wars of that age were unlike any before. Whole systems fell into shadow. Demons strode openly upon battlefields. Planets were scoured of life, not by alien invaders but by the very armies sworn to protect them. Fleets of thousands of ships tore each other apart above dying suns. Titans dueled across blasted landscapes, their cannons leveling mountains. To the common people of the Imperium, it was a nightmare beyond comprehension. Salvation and destruction, both bearing the face of the Emperor's sons. Through it all, Horus advanced, his hatred sharpening into singular purpose. He did not seek merely to defeat his father, but to unmake his dream. If Terra fell, the Imperium would collapse, and chaos would reign. Toward Terra he marched, his traitor legions at his side, the warp itself boiling with his ascendants. The siege of Terra became the crucible of mankind. The walls of the imperial palace, raised by Dorn's genius, shook beneath bombardment. The skies burned with fire as traitor fleets clashed with loyalists above the throne world. Within the walls, Rogel Dorn commanded with unyielding will, while Sanguinius, angelic and sorrowful, inspired all with his courage. The custodes fought with the fury of demigods, and the mortal soldiery of the Imperium gave their lives in billions, knowing only that they must hold the line until the end. The Emperor himself, though bound to his secret webway project, could not remain apart. He emerged at last to defend his throne, wielding his power openly for the first time in the Crusade. His presence was a beacon amid despair, yet even his strength could not halt the tide forever. The palace trembled, its gates battered, its walls breached. At the height of the siege, Horus cast open the shields of his flagship, daring his father to come. The Emperor accepted, knowing that the end would be decided not by armies but by a single confrontation. With him went his chosen, Rogel Dorn, Sanguinius, and others. Yet it was within the heart of Horus's chamber that destiny was sealed. Legends tell that Sanguinius faced Horus first. The angel fought with unmatched grace, but even he could not withstand the might of the War Master empowered by chaos. He fell, his death cry echoing across the warp, a wound that has never healed. When the Emperor found him, his son's blood marked the floor. a symbol of sacrifice beyond words. Then father and son faced one another, the emperor radiant with the light of uncounted souls, Horus burning with the fury of the dark gods. Their duel shook reality itself, a clash not only of blades but of wills. Love corrupted into hatred, destiny turned upon itself. For long moments they seemed equals, Horus driven by rage, the emperor tempered by grief. The gods themselves watched, their laughter woven into Horus's every strike. At last, the emperor saw that words could not reach him. His son, once beloved above all others, was gone, consumed beyond redemption. With sorrow greater than the stars, the emperor unleashed his full power. His hand struck not as father, but as executioner, and Horus was obliterated. His soul was torn from the warp, annihilated beyond even the gods' power to reclaim. Victory came, but at a terrible price. The emperor was mortally wounded, his body shattered beyond natural repair. His loyal warriors bore him back to Terra, to the golden throne he had built in secret. There his spirit was bound, his body interred in agony, his will stretched across the warp as a beacon. Neither alive nor dead, he became the emperor eternal, seated forever upon the throne. The heresy was ended, but the dream was broken. The Imperium had survived, but it was scarred, and its father was silent. The Golden Age had ended in betrayal, and the long night had begun. Chapter 8. The Silent Throne and the Eternal Vigil. The Horus heresy ended in ruin and sorrow. Horus was gone, his body obliterated, his soul unmade. The traitor legions fled into the Eye of Terror, driven back but not destroyed, their hatred preserved for all ages to come. The loyal sons mourned, their legions broken and weary, their father grievously wounded. The dream of the Great Crusade lay shattered, not by alien foes or demonic hordes, but by the betrayal of the Emperor's own children. Upon Terra, the Golden Throne awaited. Once, it had been the Emperor's greatest secret, a gateway into the webway, a means by which humanity might travel the stars free from the warp's perils. But the project was never completed. Demonic incursions had flooded the nascent tunnels, and the Emperor himself had been forced to seal them, sacrificing the work of centuries. The throne, meant to be a doorway to freedom, became instead a prison. It was there that the master of mankind was interred, his body shattered beyond healing, his soul bound to its mechanisms by the greatest of his surviving servants. There he has remained for 10,000 years, neither living nor dead, neither wholly present nor wholly absent. His mortal flesh withered, his voice silent, yet his will still burns across the immaterium. The Astronomicon, the great psychic beacon, shines from Terra, guiding ships through the warp. Without it, the Imperium would collapse into isolation, its worlds cut off by storms and silence. Yet to fuel it, sacrifices are demanded. Every day, thousands of psychers are consumed, their souls burned upon the altar of the throne to sustain the light. Thus, the Imperium endures, but at a cost unending. The Emperor, who once forbade worship, became a god in silence. For when his voice no longer spoke, mortals gave meaning to his silence. They proclaimed that his sacrifice was eternal, that his stillness was divine mystery, that his endurance upon the throne was proof of his godhood. Where once the imperial truth had torn down temples, now the ecclesiarchy raised them higher than ever. Cathedrals of stone and steel rose upon every world, their spires piercing poisoned skies, their halls echoing with hymns. Priests clothed him in names, the God-Emperor, the Master of mankind, the Savior of Terra. Thus the paradox was complete. The Emperor had lived to free humanity from faith, yet in his silence, faith consumed his Imperium. To the people of a million worlds, he was no longer a man of infinite purpose, but a deity enthroned. Every battle was fought in his name, every sacrifice offered to his glory, every prayer whispered into his silence. The imperial creed declared that no god existed but him, and those who denied it were branded heretic. His dream of reason became a fortress of religion. Yet though his voice does not speak, his hand is still felt. Across the millennia, there are those who claim visions, saints who hear whispers, psychers who dream of golden light, soldiers who glimpse him in moments of desperation. Some say these are delusions, born of faith and fear. Others swear they are true, fragments of his will reaching through the veil. Whether real or imagined, they sustain a people who might otherwise despair. The custodian guard, his golden sentinels, stand ever watchful before his throne. For 10,000 years they have not faltered, their vigil unbroken. The Inquisition claims to serve his will, hunting heresy, corruption, and Xenos threats with ruthless authority. The Adepta Sororitas, the Sisters of Battle, march in his name, wielding flame and him alike. The Space Marine chapters, born from the broken legions, fight on as his angels of death, each proclaiming loyalty to their father upon the throne. All serve him, though he no longer commands them with words. His silence has become command, his absence authority. But silence breeds questions. Does he still think? Does he dream? Does he suffer? Some whisper that his body decays, that the mechanisms of the throne falter, that each day is borrowed time. Tech priests labor endlessly to maintain the vast machine, chanting litanies as they replace burned circuits with relics older than empires. Some say the throne is failing, that the sacrifices are no longer enough, that the Astronomicon flickers more often with each passing century. If it fails, the Imperium will collapse, and mankind will be left to the void. Others whisper darker possibilities. Some believe the Emperor is not dying, but changing, that his long silence is chrysalis, and that one day he will rise anew, not as man nor as God, but as something beyond either. The ecclesiarchy proclaims this as prophecy, though it is written in 100 contradictory forms, that he will awaken in glory, or in wrath, or in judgment. To some, this hope sustains them. To others, it is dread, for who can say what he will be if he ever rises? Meanwhile, the Imperium staggers beneath his absence. The bureaucracy of the Adeptus Terra has swollen into a labyrinth, ruling not with vision but inertia. The ecclesiarchy wields vast power, often corrupt, often tyrannical. The Inquisition acts as both guardian and terror, its authority unchecked. Wars rage without end, against the alien, against the heretic, against the traitor who still strikes from the eye of terror. Each conflict drains the Imperium further, yet still it endures. For though the Emperor does not command, his throne binds all. Without him, the galaxy would already be ash. And so the vigil continues. In the cavernous halls of the Imperial Palace, beneath mountains of stone, the golden throne burns with quiet agony. The custodians stand silent, their eyes never leaving their master. The priests chant hymns, their voices echoing among columns older than nations. Tech priests work without ceasing, their mechadendrites whispering over consoles. And at the center the Emperor remains, motionless, withered, yet eternal. For 10,000 years, this has been humanity's paradox. The Emperor, who sought to lead mankind into an age without gods, has become its only god. He, who forbade superstition, is now the object of worship. He, who dreamed of unity through reason, has become unity through faith. His silence has shaped more than his voice ever could. Thus does the origin of the Emperor reach its culmination. From the sacrifice of the shamans he was born. Through the ages he guided in secret. Upon Terra he conquered in fire. In the Great Crusade he built a dream of unity. In the heresy he suffered betrayal. And now, in silence, he holds the fate of humanity still. His story is not ended, for his vigil endures, a flame that burns against the endless night. And so, you have heard the story. The story of one who was never merely a man, nor ever truly a god. The story of the Emperor of mankind, born of sacrifice in humanity's first dawn, hidden shepherd through the ages, conqueror of Terra, father of Primarchs, dreamer of unity, and silent ruler enthroned in deathless watch. He was not chance, but design. Not destiny alone, but the sum of countless choices. From the shamans who gave their lives that he might exist, to the sons who betrayed him and those who remained faithful, his path has always been written in sacrifice. He is the living thread that binds humanity together, whether as guide in shadow, or master in golden light, or God in silence. And though 10,000 years have passed since he last walked among his people, still his hand endures. You can see it in every candle lit in a cathedral hive. You can hear it in the hymns chanted by weary soldiers before battle. You can feel it in the ceaseless defiance of a species that refuses to surrender to the dark. His voice may not speak, but his presence binds a million worlds together. Remember, listener, that the Imperium itself is paradox, vast, eternal, yet fragile and weary. It survives not because victory is certain, but because its people refuse to let the flame go out. That is the Emperor's gift and his burden. That his dream continues, even in brokenness, because humanity endures. And so, as you drift into rest, imagine him there still, seated upon the throne, silent, watching, dreaming. Neither alive nor dead, but eternal. His vigil continues, and while it does, the stars themselves cannot wholly claim mankind. Sleep now beneath that endless vigil.